An Oshkosh area school board meeting from August 14th has been viewed more than 600 times online after the board took up a report about updating the district's Title IX regulations. Title IX prohibits sex-based discrimination in any school or any other educational program that receives federal funding from the government. Up until now, the board has been split evenly on adopting amendments to its policy. New at 5, Samantha Cavalli learns how the primary issue being debated is how to accommodate transgender students in the Oshkosh School District.
I know we have a legal and a moral obligation to educate all kids. And I know on this agenda we also have a upcoming report on safety. I consider this to be a safety issue.
A community divided when it comes to updating Title IX regulations, and a district that could lose federal funding money if the updates aren't made. The new regulations include gender identity, sexual presentation, and pregnancy in the definition of sex-based discrimination. Due to a federal court ruling, 3 district schools are exempt from including the updates: Carl Traeger Elementary School, Carl Traeger Middle School, and Oshkosh West High School. The school district as a whole still discussing adopting the regulations. Cora Novi, the director of Oshkosh Pride, says as a transgender woman in the workforce, she is protected, and so should students.
Why is this such a roadblock? Why have we spent an hour discussing this? Especially, you say you care about the students, but half of you are not sure what gender is.
Laura Ackman, Winnebago chapter chair for the conservative group Moms for Liberty, says this revision is a significant change, saying current district policy already protects everyone.
The old Title IX 2 was 2 paragraphs, and it was meant to protect girls and women in sports and education. What the risk is with the new policy is it does potentially, in some instances, put the transgender student above the girls.
The district could risk losing $5.5 million in federal funding if it does not adopt the exact language of the new Title IX policy. In addition to the new regulations, it also asks for further staff training and implementation of the rules on certain off-site school activities like field trips. However, the district is struggling with a teacher shortage. Board President Chris Wright says the goal is to make sure that all students are being protected in schools.
If OASD's hosting something, or if a kid's going on a field trip somewhere, right? We want those kids to be safe whenever they're within our care.
We reached out to Oshkosh Superintendent Brian Davis for an interview, but he declined our request. The Board of Education's next meeting is Wednesday, August 28th at 6 p.m. Today, Oshkosh Pride urged supporters to attend the meeting, saying it has been, quote, bombarded with specific violent threats ever since last Wednesday's meeting. In Oshkosh, Samantha Cavalli, Action 2 News.